Mercenaries, cyber attacks, targeted disinformation. Russia no longer depends on classical methods of warfare in its campaign to destabilize Ukraine. In the past week alone, Ukraine has seen unprecedented cyber attacks against both the defense ministry and two large Ukrainian banks, Private Bank and JSC Ashad Bank. Individual customers and the whole online banking system were affected. This coincided with reports from the front line in eastern Ukraine of intensified clashes between Russian-trained rebels from Luhansk and Donetsk and Ukrainian army forces. Also, reports that the Russian parliament is on the verge of recognizing these self-pronounced people's republics. These are just some examples of the skirmishes in the hybrid war that Russia has been fighting against Ukraine for 8 years now. The world has largely looked the other way, and for the people of Ukraine, it has just become part of everyday life. In hybrid warfare, what is very important to remember is that non-military methods play a central role, says Marguerite Klein, a researcher with the Berlin-based German Institute for Security Affairs, SWP, who specializes in Eastern Europe. It is not primarily a question of the military occupation of territory. Instead, it's about generating influence. Demonstrations of military might, like the current troop build-up on the border with Ukraine, the military exercises in Belarus, as well as the carefully choreographed communications surrounding the announced troop withdrawal, are all part of a well-equipped toolbox, whereby the main priority is to determine the narrative. And Vladimir Putin has truly mastered such a coordinated approach. Global anxiety. Kiev.com. Anybody who has spent much time in recent weeks monitoring the mood in Ukraine, be it on social media and other networks, or talking with ordinary people, may have been surprised to discover how calm many Ukrainians are. Of course, there has been some anxiety and reports of families even contemplating fleeing the country to join friends and relatives in Germany or Poland. Israel, meanwhile, has reportedly even set up an evacuation strategy for Jews wanting to leave Ukraine. Still, the mood in Kiev might almost be described as mellow. There seems to be little doubt that people have simply gotten used to the hybrid warfare waged against their country by Moscow. And perhaps they're more battle-hardened than the febrile international media. 8 years is, after all, a long time to become accustomed to new realities. 8 years since the Revolution of Dignity, or the Maidan Revolution in the capital Kiev. It's a strategy of attrition. They are trying to put Ukraine under as much pressure as possible, especially domestically, with the goal of pushing it back onto a pro-Russian path, says SWP researcher Klein. One aim is certainly also to create what might be called Ukraine fatigue in the West, says the researcher, in an attempt to explain the constant cycle of tension and de-escalation, more tension and more de-escalation. All this, says Marguerite Klein, helps to create a sense, for instance, that the U.S. leadership is simply paranoid. And part of that strategy is surely the announcement of a troop withdrawal at precisely the moment when German Chancellor Olaf Scholz was visiting Moscow. At the same time, however, there is no real evidence that a substantial withdrawal has begun. Look at the units that were deployed from as far away as Siberia or Russia's Far East. If they were removed, that would really be a signal that a pullback has begun. Instead, the only troops being withdrawn are those who could be back on the front line in no time at all, Klein explains. Putin's real target, the Ukrainian economy. Vladimir Putin's show of force has had a concrete impact on the heart of Ukraine. For instance, the fear of full-scale war, real or not, was enough to see the national airline UIA losing its insurance coverage for some flights and talking about possibly